We have breaking news. A gunman with automatic weapons opening fire from the 32nd floor of Mandalay Bay.
159 is coming from the Mandalay Bay is coming out a window.
You're listening to Hidden Truth, Las Vegas Shooter with Jim Breslow. Find us at hiddentruthshow.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Here's Jim Breslow.
Welcome back to Las Vegas Shooter. We've got another great episode of Vegas Shooter. We've brought back Laura Loomer, citizen journalist. She works with InfoWars. She works with Milo Yiannopoulos with Dangerous, and she's writing a book about the Las Vegas shooting called What Happens in Vegas. She's been going through all the documents and the body cam and the audio, et cetera, that the Las Vegas police have been putting out there. It's voluminous stuff. We've been going through it also, but Laura has really been going through it with a fine-tooth comb, and you're going to be amazed at some of the things that she has found, including another ISIS connection related to Stephen Paddock. So we're going to play that interview for you now. In the meantime, I remind you, continue to support us at Hidden Truth Show on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and YouTube. And please support our show on Patreon, hiddentruthshow.com. Go to hiddentruthshow.com and find the button to support us on Patreon. Here's our interview with Laura Loomer. So let's just start by talking about all the stuff that's been released by the police finally as a result of that court ruling. And I just want to get your thoughts, having gone through it. You know, what are you finding interesting in it so far?
Well, there's been now 6 batches of information that have been released. And the 6th batch, I guess that would be today, in which I'm told footage from 28 body cams was released, along with 500 audio files. And in the last batch of information that was released, and the one prior to that as well, which includes 911 calls, witness statements, and also dispatch logs from officers, there's a lot of inconsistencies that don't match up with what law enforcement told us the night of the shooting and the immediate aftermath after the shooting as well in the first joint FBI and LVMPD press conferences. And it also proves that I was right when I confronted Sheriff Lombardo at the press conference when I asked him, why they were lying about the timeline. Because the new documents prove that on the night of the shooting, the FBI and LVMPD was aware that Stephen Paddock checked in on the 25th. But as you know, Sheriff Lombardo, who unfortunately was just reelected last night, and Aaron Rouse, who's the special agent in charge of the FBI, they told people for about a week and a half after the shooting that Stephen Paddock checked in on the 28th, when they knew for a fact that night, as documented in the dispatch logs, that he was there on the 25th.
Yeah. Now, speaking of that issue, I mean, do you have any theory as to why they weren't more upfront about that to begin with? Any particular?
Well, they're obviously hiding information. And look, it's not a conspiracy theory to say that. Another aspect of the dispatch logs that are very concerning is on one of the pages. It says that when Metro officers entered the room, they found 3 women who were checked into Stephen Paddock's room. So what I want to know is, why did Sheriff Lombardo and why did Aaron Rouse why did they say and then continue to tell us that there was nobody else in Stephen Paddock's room? If you recall, they said, Stephen Paddock's a lone shooter. He didn't have any help. Mary Lou Danley was in the Philippines. Nobody knew who this guy was. Nobody was in the room, right? But then, of course, I had exclusively reported the room receipts that I obtained that showed that he ordered room service for 2. I was able to track down a Facebook post from one of the employees, the housekeeping employees, that was posted in Spanish that said that Stephen Paddock had ordered room service for multiple people. And what do you know? They said they found 3 women in the room. So who are these women, and how come we're not told who these women are, right? It's the worst mass shooting in U.S. history.
Now, when you say they found 3 women in the room, there's two possible reportings on that. One is 3 were registered to the room versus 3 were actually in the room when they breached the door. Which are you saying?
Well, the dispatch log says 3 females in the room. 3 females in the room. So you can see the dispatch logs for yourself, and people can interpret that information on their own. But when if a mass shooting is taking place and officers are breaching the door, do you really think they're going to be like focused immediately on looking for whether or not like people are checked in the room, or are they going to look for actual people who are in the room who may be shooters, right? They're going to be looking for the shooter. I guess they found Stephen Paddock, or they say they found him dead on the floor. And then who else was in the room? And, you know, from those dispatch logs, it's pretty clear that they're saying that the room was in control, room 32135, which was Stephen Paddock's suite. And then they said that, you know, they mentioned something about the suspect. You can go back and see the exact wording yourself. And then they also said 3 females in the room.
Yeah. So, you know, we have body cam of the police entering. We don't see 3 women in that. There's been no other reports anywhere of 3 women being in the room when they breached the door. So I think most people are interpreting that to mean, even though they said in the room, was mean registered to the room.
But even then, even if it was registered to the room, didn't LVMPD and the FBI say that Stephen Paddock was registered to the room by himself? They did, right? So I don't know why people are pretending like this isn't a big deal. And it's so obnoxious because you have all these reporters in Vegas and they have one job, right? It's not like they're national news reporters. Their one job is to report the news in Vegas, and none of them are reporting this information. I think it's a pretty big deal. Don't you? I mean, don't you think it's a pretty big deal if there were 3 women registered to the room and the FBI and the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and this crooked sheriff that was just reelected last night is telling the American people for 9 months straight that there was nobody else registered to the room besides Stephen Paddock?
Yeah, I think it is a big deal, and I think that there's a lot of the fact that they have gone so quiet. And they're simply dumping these documents and video and audio logs with zero explanation, zero organization to them, what have you, is really considering what happened and the tragedy and the people that are dead and the people that are injured, for them to be so callous in the way that they've been handling this, in blocking any efforts for people to get the information, ultimately only disclosing it once the court requires them to do that, and then doing it almost like a child, like saying, okay, we had to do this, so here you go.
Exactly. Well, and another thing, and you can see a lot of my reports, they're on dangerous.com and also on lauraloomer.us, but it appears that the FBI knew about Stephen Paddock prior to the Las Vegas shooting. And my source within the FBI told me that the Vegas shooting could have been prevented because the FBI had information available to them that would have prompted an investigation prior to Stephen Paddock carrying out the Mandalay Bay shooting. So if he even really did, right?
And what is that information?
So in one of the documents that were released, it was an account by one of the police officers and the detectives reporting on behalf of Department of Homeland Security. His name is Officer Andre Bates, and he works for LVMPD. On October 6th, he wrote that they became aware that Stephen Paddock's bank account had been shut down on the basis of suspicion of terrorism prior to the Las Vegas shooting. So one of his bank accounts, he had many of them, of course, one was actually shut down because he kept making large international transfers, and the bank suspected that he was using the money for terrorism. And according to my source in the FBI, when a bank shuts down a account for suspicion of terrorism or money laundering, they are then required to send a report, right? They have to flag it for suspicious activity, and then they have to send a report, and it's called the FinCEN database, right? And that stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And then when you send this report to FinCEN, then what happens is it goes into a database, and the FBI and other federal agencies like DHS, CIA, all of them really, they have access to FinCEN's database, which includes every single suspicious activity report that's filed. So that means that the FBI has a responsibility when an account is flagged to sort through the reports that are then submitted through FinCEN, and it's their job to then investigate the people who are flagged for suspicious activity in the FinCEN database. So the FBI dropped the ball once again, just like they did many times, as we've seen in the past year or two over the years, because they didn't they didn't investigate this lead, right? I mean, this whether you want to call it an act, whether you want to call this an act of international terrorism or you want to call it an act of domestic terrorism, right? There's still that that kind of unanswered, that mystery surrounding whether or not this was an ISIS terrorist attack, because they didn't really show us any evidence that ISIS wasn't responsible, and ISIS has continued to claim responsibility. But it's clear that this still was an act of terrorism, right? When you gun down 58 people, that is terrorism. So,
well, that's why the FBI is involved. This is they're investigating terrorism.
Well, yeah, but
so tell me, where is this?
Go on.
Well, they said that there wasn't any link to ISIS. Isn't that what they said, or at least?
But I'm very skeptical of that. I don't believe that, and I also think that the FBI just doesn't want to admit that they could have prevented this, and they dropped the ball by failing to act on the report that should have been sent to FinCEN. And look, maybe a report was not sent to FinCEN, but it is standard bank protocol to submit these reports. So that would mean then that the bank dropped the ball as well. But either way, investigators would have had prior knowledge.
So where is this information? To be more clear, where are you getting the information regarding the bank account being closed down? Is that public information?
Yes. So, of course, the media is not talking about this, and LVMTV, like you said, they're doing everything to release these documents in a very disorganized way so people can't find it. So you have to literally read it page by page to get this information. But there are several PDF files. It was in the last batch. No, it was in batch 4. So the fourth batch of information, and it's on page 85 of the PDF. You can go to dangerous.com and you can actually type in, the name of the article is Exclusive Vegas Shooters Bank Account Had Been Seized for Terror Financing, New Docs Reveal. I released the story on June 7th, and all of the documents are there so you can see them for yourself in case you want to just kind of look at it and observe it and make your own conclusion.
Mm-hmm. So that we know is definitively true, that a bank account of his was closed down by the bank. It would have been the bank that would have made the initial determination to close it down based on suspicious activity?
Well, specifically suspicion of terror financing, yes.
Mm-hmm. And then, so the bank makes that determination, then passes that information on.
But then it's standard protocol.
Right.
Yeah.
And do we know what? I assume that we do know that the information was passed on.
Well, we don't know because they're not revealing in this document which bank it was, right? And so investigators would be able to know that. I don't work for the FBI. I'm not a police officer, but given that this is the worst mass shooting in U.S. history, I'm sure that they have access to all of his bank accounts and all of his banking history so they could determine themselves. It's not like this is hard information for these people who, their job is to be, investigators for the government all day. This is easy for them to find out, so they're just hiding.
And what about, does it provide the date that the account was frozen?
No, because it's an officer's statement, and the officer is recounting his conversation with Stephen Paddock's ex-wife, or whoever the woman. It appears to be Stephen Paddock's ex-wife. So if you go through, the document, it says that they redact the names, and it says Blank stated that she was married to Stephen Paddock for 6 years, but divorced approximately 25 years ago. And then it's like, they keep on redacting that name. It's obviously an ex-wife, and his ex-wife is Peggy. And then when you go down further, it said, Stephen used to own a plane and flew it over different locations, but he sold it years ago. Blank stated, still referring to the ex-wife, that Stephen does not use drugs or drink alcohol that she knows, but Stephen has numerous bank accounts, and one of his banks closed his accounts because of all the high money withdrawals. They felt that it was terrorism related.
So that's the extent of the statement?
Yeah, and then they said they didn't know which bank it was, but she stated that the last couple years, Stephen had become very angry and never mentioned anything about committing violence towards anybody. So, that would also explain if he really was radicalized by Islamic terrorists, which is what ISIS is claiming. It would explain why he would become very angry, right? Because it's a very violent ideology. And if he was financing terrorism and he was being, indoctrinated with Islam, and if he really was communicating with ISIS, that would explain his behavior change. And it would also explain why he wasn't drinking alcohol. And it would also explain why he cleared his debt prior to committing the mass shooting, if he really is the only shooter, because in order to go to paradise when you're an Islamic terrorist, you have to clear all of your debt. And what I want to ask you is, do you really think that it makes a lot of sense for a guy who's about to commit mass murder and then kill himself to want to pay off his marker at the casino? Like, why would you even care? You know, if you're gonna kill yourself, why do you care if you owe the casino money?
Well, as long as you're tying pieces together, let's throw in one out of left field, but is still very real, and that is child pornography on his computer. How would you explain that one in the context of what you were just saying?
I think that that's a distraction, right? I mean, look, I think that when you throw out things like keywords like child pornography, people are going to fixate on that, and it's going to be a real distraction. And they first released this information when they released the first official LVMPD report. And what I want to know is, like, even if he was into child pornography or not, like, what does that have anything to do with the shooting? They said that there wasn't a motive.
Well, that's for us to answer. That's for us to answer. I mean, first of all, let's assume that it's correct. They weren't making it up. We don't know the extent of it. We also know, of course, that Bruce Paddock was charged with child pornography. I mean, it is interesting. We don't know, was he consuming it or was he trafficking in it?
You know, one thing that people need to understand about ISIS, too, is how they operate and how they make their money. ISIS makes their money many different ways, and particularly in the Philippines, which is where Mary Lou Danley is from, and which is where he was making these large financial transfers to. ISIS traffics a lot of children, right? And so there may be some element to this. And I'm not saying that that is 100%, fact, right? Because I can't prove that. But it makes you wonder, right? I mean, a lot of these things it's supporting evidence that ISIS was responsible, because when you look at the connection, to the Philippines, and you look at the history of what ISIS does in the Philippines, you know, it just kind of paints a very valid, probable scenario that I think the FBI and law enforcement are just really unwilling to talk about, because it's no surprise that, you know, things aren't clean in Vegas. This investigation has been a nightmare. This investigation has been so corrupt. I mean, they've lied to the public. They've lied to the media. They've issued a comment ban. They've completely shut down all discussion of this. And of course, they're not going to want to admit.
Well, that's all behavior. That's all behavior from my standpoint of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
The FBI.
The FBI, on the other hand, let's talk about the FBI for a second, because all the things that you're pointing out can be perfectly good explanations as to why the FBI is taking so long on this, that there is so much to investigate, and that they're promising a report or estimating it by the 1-year anniversary. So obviously we're not going to know what they come up with until then.
They changed it. They recently said with Lombardo that there's going to be a new report in July. So how is it that as we get closer?
Well, that's Las Vegas. Lombardo apparently said that the Las Vegas police, remember, they've issued a preliminary report, as you know. So they're saying they're going to issue their final report in July, and then the FBI's behavioral analysis would come out after that.
I don't understand from I guess it doesn't really make much sense to me from an investigative standpoint why the LVMPD needs to have their own investigation, and then the FBI has to have like a completely different investigation if the FBI was in control of this investigation. Right? I mean, the FBI took over this investigation, which is why Aaron Rouse is at all of these press conferences. So how is it possible, right? And this is what doesn't make sense to me. How is it possible that LVMPD is going to have their report done in July, but then, what is it, June, July, August, September, October, 3 months later, the FBI is not going to be done with theirs? I mean, don't you think that a report should come out at the same time? Like, how does one investigation finish, but the other one doesn't? I just don't understand. It just doesn't make sense. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a professional investigator or a member of law enforcement to know that that's just not standard protocol. And I've talked to LVMPD detectives, sources of mine who are in the LVMPD. I've talked to people on the ground work at MGM. I've talked to sources within the FBI, and they all have told me that it's not standard protocol. I mean, there's something seriously wrong with this investigation.
And your explanation is what? What's your theory? If you're saying that it's not protocol, et cetera, what's really going on?
I think that they're trying to hide the fact that this was an act of terrorism, and I really believe that there were multiple shooters involved. In fact, there was another witness statement that was it was a transcribed 911 call. If you listen to the 911 calls that were just released, I believe like a week or so ago, one of them is actually from a security guard at Mandalay Bay. And the security guard called LVMPD and confirmed that there were multiple shooters in the hotel. So not only just in Stephen Paddock's room, but on the crystal level of Mandalay Bay, which would then be the Four Seasons Hotel. And then they also mentioned that there was an active shooter on the casino level. So, and then they said that they confirmed that. So what I want to know is why, if these reports are coming, they're not reports from just witnesses who are attending the concert who thought that they saw and heard multiple shooters. I'm talking about an actual Mandalay Bay security guard who was saying that they saw this and that they were reporting and communicating with other security guards on the radio.
You've been focused, it seems, when we talk about terrorism on the ISIS connection. What do you think about other things that have come out in the report, witness statements about Paddock making comments about Ruby Ridge and Waco and anti-government remarks and government coming to take your guns and that type of thing? What's your analysis of that, and whether it might have been a terror attack more in line with, say, the Oklahoma City terror attack?
I don't know. I don't see. ISIS doesn't take responsibility for attacks that they're not responsible for. All right, there have been Muslims who have carried out acts of terrorism in the past and have claimed to be ISIS, and ISIS has said no, that wasn't us. So I don't trust it. And I think that the liberal media is so desperate to try to, portray this as some crazy right winger to use this for their gun control legislation. And I think that some of the politicians in Nevada are desperate to use this to push for gun control. But if you notice, just compare Parkland and the Las Vegas shooting. For 2 months straight after the Parkland shooting, the media obsessed about gun control every single day. I mean, there had to have been like 6 or 7 hours of just like Parkland discussion nonstop every single day on TV. They were obsessed with it. But then 3 times as many people died in Las Vegas, and after 3 days of the shooting, you didn't hear anything else about gun control. Nothing. And 3 times as many people died. So I think that there are people who know a lot more than they're saying. I know, actually, that people know a lot more than they're saying. And I think that they know this has absolutely nothing to do with guns. It probably has something more to do with terrorism. And that's just really bad for the Vegas economy, right? Because they don't want people knowing that there's potentially terrorists on the run in Vegas. So
yeah, that certainly is one distinction in this situation, is that, the Las Vegas police have no interest in talking about this, especially in light of all the mistakes and screw-ups they had in the early days of reporting. Certainly the casinos and MGM doesn't want people talking about it to expose their potential role and negligence in it. And then, of course, Las Vegas generally, when it comes to a tourism standpoint, the last thing they need is people continuing to dwell and think about what happened on October 1st.
Yeah, but we should dwell on it and we should talk about it, because we're not going to get answers if we just do what these investigators in the casinos want us to do and forget about it. Of course they want us to forget about it. It's really bad for business. People aren't going to want to go to concerts and events in Vegas if they think that they're going to get shot up. And, I think that it's very reckless and it's irresponsible and it's very unfair to the American people for the FBI and LVMPD to issue a comments ban like they've done recently in the past month and stop talking altogether and giving comments to the media about the Las Vegas shooting documents. I mean, they don't even reply. They never reply when I contact them, but I know other reporters, and it's documented. They issued a comment ban. Sheriff Lombardo told the MPD not to talk about this. How are you not going to talk about the worst mass shooting in U.S. history when new documents are released? Have you ever heard of such a thing in your life?
Well, I can tell you one person who endorsed him, or entity, or person,
MVM.
either way or both, which is the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which endorsed Lombardo, and of course we know the Journal is owned by Sheldon Adelson.
And look, I got in a little argument this morning with one of the Las Vegas Review-Journal reporters, and look, I don't know how much Adelson has to do with the endorsement, or whether it's some type of board, or whether there's it's a vote on employees there. I don't know how it works exactly. But the fact of the matter is it's the reporters themselves who need to be held accountable, because the reporters and the editorial review at the Las Vegas Review-Journal, it's very hypocritical of them to endorse Sheriff Lombardo and then the next week write an article about how he's misleading voters. Like, why would you guys endorse a guy for sheriff when you're literally suing him because of his lack of transparency and his refusal to turn over documents to the media? Like, why would the Las Vegas Review-Journal want to endorse the person who is in charge of the investigation they are literally suing over? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And it's so dirty. It is so dirty.
Yeah.
And I brought this point up.
I mean, if they were interested, the media should be interested in anything above all else. It's First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of information, openness, government openness, and Lombardo could not have been more closed in this, at least since his initial press conferences when he messed up. And for them to come out and endorse him, my only explanation for it is the Sheldon Adelson connection, because the casinos are clearly backing him, and Vegas has a history of electing whoever got the casino endorsement. I mean, he raised well over $1 million compared to $50,000 of his nearest opponent.
Could be I don't know if Adelson was directly involved with the endorsement. I don't know. Adelson owns a lot of different, a lot of things. I mean, the guy has a lot of money. He owns a lot of different things, and so. Who knows if he was directly involved with the Review-Journal endorsing. I don't know if they have some type of review board, or if there's some type of editorial board, or how the endorsements come about. I don't know if there's a vote. Who knows? So I can't really speak on that, but I do think that it is hypocritical for the Las Vegas Review-Journal to endorse Sheriff Lombardo and then the next week write an article about how, Sheriff Lombardo is misleading voters. Like, why would you endorse a guy who you're basically writing an article about, accusing him of being a liar? Because he is a liar, right? Lombardo is a liar.
Let's talk about these two officers that responded and the conflict between what Officer Hendricks says regarding what floor he responded to versus what the Mandalay Bay security supervisor said. The security supervisor said that he and Hendricks got off on the 32nd floor and they were there while the shooting was still going on, whereas Hendricks says he was only on the 31st floor. Have you been looking into that?
Yeah, I'm looking into a lot of things. It appears that, there was this kind of delay, and a lot of, the officers didn't really respond fast enough, neither did SWAT. And, if you go back to the call that I was talking about specifically with the Mandalay Bay security officer, this call was taking place about 20 minutes after the shooting. And so at that point in time, SWAT was still not on the 32nd floor. And so there is this really strange timeline that I think Metro needs to account for, because I don't know how they're going to explain why it took them so long if they knew at that time that the shooter was on the 32nd floor and they had identified it, why it took them so long to get up there. It seems like that's another...
Yeah, I mean, Campos was shot. Yeah, we all know that Campos, the security guard, was shot on the 32nd floor, and he called down and reported that he was shot. There's multiple reports directly from Mandalay Bay in their statement and in the police reports that they knew the shooter was on 32, yet you have officers deployed to 31, which, there's been a combination of explanations for that. One is that there was also reports of shots on 31. The other is that was a tactical decision.
Yeah.
So that hasn't been rectified. What was the reason for 31? Number one. And number two, you have this statement by the Mandalay Bay security supervisor to the FBI and the police in a live interview, saying that he and one of the police officers, Hendricks, was on 32. The other guys got off on 31. They got off on 32, and they were there on the floor during the shooting.
Well, it's the same with this other report that I was referring to as well when I was talking about the Mandalay Bay security guards. So, look, there's a lot of inconsistencies. With the timeline, with the dispatch reports, and what they say in the FIT report, and it doesn't add up. And you have an actual call. I'll just read you the transcript that lasted, over 20 minutes, and the Mandalay Bay security officer on dispatch said that there was an active shooter in room 32135 on the 32nd floor in Mandalay Bay. And then they added that they knew that he had barricaded the doors. So how is it that, remember when they said that Jesus Campos was the only security guard who was up there, and then they made this really big deal about Jesus because they said, he was the last person up there, he was the only person who saw. Well, it looks like, according to these dispatch logs and these 911 calls, that isn't even the case. Because this other security guard, who doesn't even appear to be Jesus Campos, is talking about how the room is barricaded, and they don't know that they don't know what's going on inside the room, but that there were witness reports of glass shattering. So how would they know that the door was barricaded if Metro wasn't there, and if SWAT wasn't there, and there was no other security since Jesus Campos had been shot? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, Lombardo not talking, was probably very likely because of the upcoming election that he knew he faced. So now that he has won, now he needs to present himself again to the public. So he stayed underground. Good job. You got reelected. Now it's time to come forward. There's no reason for you have no personal motive anymore of your own reelection to stay quiet. Come forward and answer these questions, because the information they've been releasing is raising all kinds of questions that need answering. And when are we going to get the answers? Never. I mean, what's he waiting for?
I don't think he's going to.
I think it's also callous. Lombardo did make a statement at some meds club last week about the investigation and stating when the next report was going to come out, and noting that no, we don't know the motive, and very likely we never will.
Yeah, that's not true.
What kind of statement? But I mean, to have the sheriff saying that we don't know the motive and we likely never will, I mean, isn't that your job to go find the motive? How can you close this case until you've determined, or at least given us your best estimate based on all the information as to what you think his motive was? And to be so, I mean, that is your job as investigators. I mean, I don't think that this investigation is fully closed until we know what his motive was, because how do we know what to do in the future and prevent these things in the future if we don't know what his motive was?
Yeah, look, it's just a load of crap that they don't know what the motive is. They know, they're just not telling us. And look, the documents are showing that people know as well. I mean, there was one document in particular, a witness statement from an Uber driver who picked up Stephen Paddock and dropped him off at Mandalay Bay. And you could tell that the lady doesn't speak very good English based on her witness testimony. But she said that Stephen Paddock had told her that there was going to be a terrorist attack at the Mandalay Bay. And this is stuff that the FBI never told us about. This is in an article as well that you can read. And what I want to know is, why isn't the Las Vegas media doing this? How is it that I live thousands of miles away on the other side of the country, and yet I'm still scooping them on stories that are happening in their own backyard? Not even with regards to just the Las Vegas shooting, but, I recently broke the story about the cover-up of the MS-13 gang killings that were taking place in Vegas that Lombardo was covering up. You had MS-13 committing a string of murders and mutilating the bodies and dumping body parts in tourist areas in Vegas, like Lake Mead. And after my report came out, it prompted Lombardo the next day to hold a press conference. And this reporter from the Review Journal messaged me and said, "Wow, congrats on that huge scoop. That's a big scoop." And yet they never mentioned they never mentioned that I had reported on the story first. They had never mentioned that Lombardo was hiding it. They completely distort it. So the Las Vegas media does not do a good job holding him accountable, and it's very scary because, you know, when you look into a lot of the crimes that are taking place, you see the innocent people who are getting killed as a result of police brutality. Like, there's so much corruption. There's police officers that are engaged in pedophilia, police officers who have committed domestic violence, who barricade themselves in their house and have standoffs with SWAT. Like, they cover this all up, and the media, like, refuses to report on it.
Well, how about the fact that he wanted to cover up the 58 murders by not including them in the homicide numbers from 2017?
Yeah, look, there's so much. They tried to say that homicide was down in Vegas, and then they didn't even include the 58 people who died. I mean, it's just such an insult. I'm telling you, this place, it's so corrupt.
So they did find, we found one ISIS connection, real ISIS connection in the documents, and that is Mary Lou Danley's daughter apparently having an ISIS friend or an ISIS sympathizer friend on Facebook. Did you see that report?
Yeah, I actually had released that story. I think I was one of the first to report on that. But yeah, Mary Lou Danley, there was a police officer who called in and reported the night of the shooting that Mary Lou Danley had a friend on Facebook, and they were obviously referring to her daughter, who had ISIS. She was connected to individuals who had ISIS beheadings and propaganda on the Facebook. And of course, Mary Lou Danley deleted her Facebook the night of the Las Vegas shooting. And, you know, she went to the Philippines. What do we know about the Philippines? There's a very large ISIS presence in the Philippines. Her fingerprints were found on the ammunition. She admitted to helping Stephen Paddock load bullets into the guns. Why isn't this lady in jail? I don't know. Where is she now? I don't know. You know, we don't know anything anymore. Where's Mary Lou Danley? Where's Brian Hodge? Where's what is his name? Eric Paddock. Where's all these people who, you know, were either family members tied to Stephen Paddock, related? Where did they go? We don't know the motive, and these people are just gone. Where are they? How come no one's talking to them? How come reporters aren't doing more?
But ultimately, all this, if part of your theory is that they don't want the ISIS connection to be exposed, then it raises the natural question, well, why not? Because certainly the ISIS connections to prior shootings, let's say Santa Barbara, for instance, were disclosed. Why would they be hiding it in this circumstance?
Exactly.
But I mean, isn't that what you're alleging is going on?
Yeah, I mean, look, they don't want to admit that there's an ISIS connection, I believe, because they don't want it to negatively impact the economy in Vegas. I mean, there's many reasons. It's going to create mass panic. So, you know, you just see a continuation of lies from LVMPD. I mean, you could even look at the immediate aftermath of the shooting on New Year's when they said that there wasn't a terror threat in Vegas, right? They said, DHS came out and said that people didn't have to worry about a terror threat, that ISIS didn't take responsibility. But then Las Vegas was labeled as the number one place for the potential of having an ISIS terrorist attack on New Year's Eve, and had more security on the Strip than New York City itself. So Las Vegas surpassed it. So how come DHS is telling people, and the FBI is telling people right after the shooting, that ISIS wasn't responsible and there isn't a terror threat, but then fast forward several months and then all of a sudden Las Vegas becomes like the most probable location for an ISIS terrorist attack?
Well, that's certainly...
I mean, do you see how there's just inconsistency after inconsistency?
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly a valid explanation as to why they would cover it up here. If it's a lone wolf shooter, everybody can just say, oh, well, it was some crazy guy. If it was ISIS, people are going to be a little bit more scared that that's attack number one, and right, and ISIS has targeted Vegas, and they're going to target it again. Still, Paddock seems like an odd person to be associated with ISIS, but we still have the no explanation for having 3 cell phones in the room. Who was he communicating with? So clearly appears that he wasn't acting alone to have 3 cell phones. Missing hard drive.
Yeah.
You know, the missing hard drive, what was on that hard drive? Obviously, he's trying to hide something by ripping out that hard drive.
Well, Yeah, and then the hard drive goes missing, and then there's robbery at Stephen Paddock's house. And how do you have a robbery at Stephen Paddock's house when the police and FBI are supposed to be guarding it? I mean, look, anybody who says that the Las Vegas shooting investigation isn't corrupt and is a legitimate investigation, and anybody who tells you that Sheriff Lombardo and the FBI in Vegas are good people and that they've been honest about the Vegas shooting is out of their mind. Like, they're out of their mind. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, whatever your political ideology may be. I haven't met one person who can look me straight in the eye and tell me that there isn't something wrong with this Vegas investigation.
Yeah, that's why it's just still so disturbing that there wasn't more information out there for voters that would cause them to choose not to reelect this guy.
Blame the media. You know, I blame all of them. I blame all the media. All the media, whether it be the Vegas media or national media. I mean, how come the mainstream media isn't doing more to investigate this? They have millions of dollars. How come the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Fox 5, CBS, all these other stations and outlets that are in Vegas, like, what are they doing? You know, they barely did any election coverage. They didn't give a fair opportunity to Tim Bedwell and any of the other candidates who were running against Sheriff Lombardo. They covered up Sheriff Lombardo's lies. They didn't investigate him. There was audio that came out that suggested that he made a racially charged comments against black people. Like, there's so much stuff about Sheriff Lombardo and corruption in Vegas and the LVMPD that they should have brought to the attention of people. Lies, inconsistencies, you know, direct misinformation within these documents and witness statements that could have impacted the election that they chose not to report on. So for that, the Vegas media ought to be ashamed of themselves. All these reporters in Vegas ought to be ashamed of themselves, because I can't name one reporter in Las Vegas who actually stood up and said, you know what, this is wrong. Like, we have to report this.
Thank you again to our guest, Laura Loomer. Don't forget to tune in next week, which will be our final episode of Las Vegas Shooter with Elvis Monroe. We'll continue to keep you updated as Vegas information comes out. Also, in next week's episode, I'm going to give you my conclusion after this 16-week investigation as to what I think really happened in Vegas. And then don't forget, the following week, we start Season 2 of Hidden Truth Show, where we start covering the transgender movement transforming America. Follow us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Hidden Truth Show. Go to our website, hiddentruthshow.com, and support us on Patreon. Please rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Hidden Truth Show. I'm Jim Breslow. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to Hidden Truth, Las Vegas Shooter with Jim Breslow. Find us at hiddentruthshow.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show.